Hi, I'm Jill Ferris, Vice President of Education and Interpretation here at the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, and I'm joined today by Dr. Cheryl LaRoche, who was a contributing author in Sailing to Freedom, Maritime Dimensions of the Underground Railroad. We're so thrilled to have Maritime Dimensions Sailing to Freedom on exhibit here at Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, and to welcome Dr. LaRoche to the exhibition and to the Eastern Shore.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So how did you get involved in the project contributing to Sailing to Freedom?
I contributed to Sailing to Freedom for two reasons. One, I had written a lot about the Underground Railroad on land and understood, however, that almost every escape journey also involved the water. And so when I began to speak to Tim Walker, who was the editor of the volume, I had lots of stories and lots of churches, lots of institutions sitting on the water's edge, which you might not really realize today because the original building is gone. The original landscape had been changed. So when he approached me about contributing, it just made sense because I could see the confusion of the public. So how can you talk about the Underground Railroad, ground, underground, and now we're talking about sailing? So this was a great way to really expand the public's understanding of what it meant to escape on all these different forms of transportation.
So you're one of the authors in the volume talking about the Chesapeake Bay.
Yes.
What makes the geography of the Chesapeake so influential in the Maritime Underground Railroad here?
Well, I think when you look at, first of all, just the expanse of the Chesapeake, when you look at the geography of what happens to the state of Maryland and what happens to Virginia because of the Chesapeake. So now you really have that Delmarva, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, you have all of the confluence of all of these states, number one, but then you have all these tributaries. You have all of these spaces to access the bay if you're escaping. So it's not like you have to go to one port or another. There are all of these little inroads and tributaries and streams and ways in which to access the bay and therefore your freedom.
So talk a little bit about the process of researching and how you uncover stories that have been overlooked or have been discounted in the historical record.
Well, I always say I'm shameless. There's not a piece of evidence that I won't turn to if I think it will help me. I've used newspaper ads, for example. I saw a magazine ad once that led to a whole research topic. We can always verify what we see once we've been given that sort of push to begin. So obviously, one of the first things that caught my attention probably 30 years ago was that note at the bottom of the escape ad that says, "Ferrymen, be aware and do not transport this person." So they're warning you already that the waterway is vital and one of the major aspects and component of escape. And so those words were the first ones that really caught my attention and drove me towards the water in my thinking. From there, I read all kinds of narratives. I look at court cases. I look at any kind of transcription. I look at inventories and estates when people are dying. Any kind of evidence that I can piece these little pieces together to come up with a whole story, which is what we all do in this, because the Underground Railroad, you can't do something from start to finish because the person has, maybe gone 5 states or gone international or taken every form of transportation, and you might, and as often happens, you have one aspect of the story, the lens through which you see it right here. But there was a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end, and usually there's a postscript. And so piecing all of the various components and aspects of these stories is something that takes a lot of research and a lot of work.
So can you talk a little bit, how was your visit to St. Michael's today, and what stood out to you about visiting CBMM, looking at the town of St. Michael's, looking at the Miles River? What stands out to you about the landscape here?
First of all, my grandson's name is Miles. I had a great time here in St. Michael's today. It was actually surprising. I wasn't sure what I was going to find, but not only is it beautiful and the water is wonderful, but to really learn, I'm a landscape person, I'm a cultural landscape person, among other things. Every time you see me, I'll claim something new and different. You're gonna say, wait a minute, I thought you were an archaeologist. But in terms of my interest in cultural landscape, it was really illuminating for me to walk in the steps of Frederick Douglass, to understand geographically, because I had a sort of a larger understanding of Douglass, but I did not have sort of the place-based understanding of who he was and where he was when he was there. So that has proved to be really influential and important. And then coming through and looking at the boats, I'm understanding as I see these ads and they're describing the type of boat that the person escaped in, I now understand, I have a much better visual context for what that escape entailed, because now I've been able to look physically at a boat that I didn't really understand before.
It's the importance of the material culture, right?
Yes.
It's the importance of why museums are essential, that it's preserving the objects and the stories and the cultural context of people who may no longer be here.
Yes.
And it's evidence that we can uncover. So we're not just relying on somebody's words. We can look at a boat like Glide in our Waterlines exhibition, and we can think about what the experience of the Keene family was like in a boat of similar size, of a similar time period, and a similar geography.
Absolutely. You know, the other thing that in reading about the Keene family and in Tubman when she's escaping, is just how difficult the Chesapeake is to navigate. And so sometimes I think people don't understand that when you cast yourself out into the bay, you're not just going out into a placid body of water. The Chesapeake Bay can be a really treacherous body of water. And because just that particular piece of information might not be imparted, people might not understand the risks that are involved in going out. And when you told me that the log canoe, when you told me that the log canoe was easy to tip, so I'm thinking now you have to be able to maneuver this and negotiate that boat in a waterways that in and of itself is difficult to maneuver. I learned something. Mm-hmm. And so I think that when we can put all of these different aspects together, so what starts to happen for the Underground Railroad in particular, there's so many different things that people are doing. You have to learn about each of these so that you can understand their escape journey.
I think what stands out to me in your research and your effort to uncover the people mm-hmm. is that everyone was taking their easiest pathway. Mm-hmm. Nobody is trying to make this escape and claim for freedom as difficult as possible. Mm-hmm. And so to imagine how hard and how much people risked in the process of seeking freedom, you also have to imagine how difficult their life was mm-hmm. and their hopes and their dreams mm-hmm. and their humanity. Mm-hmm. And to be able to give them a name and point to uncovering that experience, you can read in between the lines and you can start to imagine more aspects of their life, even if we have one sentence about them, because we can take the landscape, we can take the artifacts and
Absolutely.
Start to pull a story together.
And you can, for me too, the last piece, particularly the Keene story, is that these family dynamics that you don't always see, because when we think about escape, we look at the ad, it's all highly individual or it's contained. And when you start to look a little further, then you get this wider lens and this story of group escapes, which I think in Sailing to Freedom, you really begin to understand that, oh, these are groups of people coming out. People are concerned about their families, they're concerned about their loved ones, and they're trying to bring them all out at once. And I think you're right, that kind of humanity isn't something that you can always glean from just looking at the individual components of the story.
Yeah, so our understanding gets more complex, but it gets richer. The more people we can bring into the narrative, the better we can understand the people who lived through these experiences, but also the people who paved the way for us living in our experiences today.
Absolutely.